Why did you fake my wife's death for 8 years?
I had to protect you.
Protect me from what?
There is a kind of grief that doesn't make noise. It doesn't scream. It doesn't fall apart in public. It just quietly hollows a person out from the inside, day after day, until the man standing in the mirror looks like someone you used to know. Marcus Webb knew that grief better than he knew anything else in the world. He had carried it for 8 years in silence, in boardrooms, in penthouse apartments, in the back seats of cars moving through cities that never stopped for anyone. He had built an empire on top of that grief, stacked billions on top of it like bricks, hoping that one day the weight of success would finally crush what was left of the pain. It never did. Some losses don't respond to money. Some wounds don't close, no matter how many zeros you add to your bank account. And Marcus Webb, for all his power and all his wealth, was still a man with a hole in his chest where a woman named Evelyn used to live. Well, Marcus Webb had not touched the door of this house in 8 years. 8 years since they told him his wife was dead. Since he locked this door, walked away, and tried to rebuild a life out of grief and silence. Today, he was here to sell it, sign the papers, move on. For real this time. He raised his hand to knock, and the door opened. And standing there, alive and breathing, was his wife. But before Marcus could say a single word, a small voice called out from behind her. Mom, who's at the door? A girl, 7, maybe 8 years old. Hazel eyes. Marcus's eyes. Marcus's nose. Marcus's face on a child he had never seen before in his life. His wife was supposed to be dead. He had attended her funeral. He had watched them lower the coffin into the ground. He had cried until there was nothing left inside of him. So who was this woman? And who was this girl? The answer would take Marcus 8 years back, to a lie so enormous, so calculated, so unforgivably cruel, that the person who told it was the last person he ever would have suspected. Stay with us. This story will change the way you think about the people closest to you. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that like, share, and subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand how a man ends up standing on the porch of a house he once called home, when staring at a ghost, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to go back to who Marcus Webb was before the money, before the grief, before the lies. Because the man who stepped out of that car on Harlow Street that afternoon was not the same man who had once lived inside those walls. Life had changed him. Loss had changed him. And the truth, when it finally came, would change him all over again. Marcus Webb grew up poor. Not the kind of poor that gets romanticized in movies. Not humble beginnings with a warm fire and a loving family gathered around a small table. This was the kind of poor that has a smell. The kind that means wearing the same shoes 2 sizes too small for an entire school year, because there is no money for new ones. The kind where the electricity gets cut off in January and you sleep in your coat. Marcus grew up on the east side of Clarksville, in a neighborhood where ambition was treated with suspicion and dreaming out loud was considered a form of arrogance. His father, Donald Webb, worked 2 jobs and still came up short most months. His mother, Virginia Webb, ran the household with an iron fist and an unshakable belief that her son was destined for something greater than this street, this city, this life. Virginia Webb was not a warm woman. She was not the kind of mother who left notes in lunchboxes or stayed up late telling stories by lamplight. She was precise, controlled, and strategic. She loved Marcus the way a general loves a battlefield, completely, obsessively, and always with an agenda. She had decided before Marcus could walk that he was going to be extraordinary, and she had spent his entire childhood engineering every condition necessary to make that happen. Marcus did not resent his mother for this, if anything, and he was grateful. Her relentless pressure had pushed him through school on a full scholarship, through a business degree at a state university, and eventually into the world of real estate investment, where his instincts for spotting undervalued land turned out to be almost supernatural. By 28, Marcus Webb had his first million. By 32, he had his first 100 million. By 35, the age he stood on that porch, he was a billionaire by every measure that mattered. I'm with a portfolio spanning 7 states and a name that appeared regularly in financial publications, alongside words like visionary and self-made. But none of that happened the way Virginia had planned it, because somewhere between the ambition and the achievement, Marcus Webb had fallen in love. Her name was Evelyn Marsh. She was 24 years old when Marcus first saw her, working the early morning shift at a diner called Rosie's on the corner of 5th and Central in downtown Clarksville. It was one of those places that smelled like coffee and bacon grease and something warm that you couldn't quite name, and Evelyn moved through it like she belonged to a different world entirely. She had a way of making every single customer feel like the most important person in the room. She remembered orders without writing them down. She laughed easily and genuinely, not the performed laugh of someone working for tips. Yes, but the real thing, the kind that started in her eyes before it ever reached her mouth. Marcus had gone in for coffee and a newspaper. He went back the next morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. It took him 3 weeks to say anything beyond his order, and another 2 weeks after that to ask for her number. Evelyn Marsh did not fall for Marcus Webb, the billionaire. She fell for Marcus, the man, the one who showed up in old jeans and a worn jacket and sat at the counter reading the paper, who said thank you like he meant it, who once helped an elderly woman carry her groceries to her car without being asked and without making a show of it. She had no idea he had money. He didn't tell her for months, and when he finally did, she went quiet for a long time and then said, "That changes things, you know." Marcus asked her how. She said, "It means I have to make sure I'm falling for you and not for what you have." They were married 11 months later in a small ceremony in the backyard of a friend's house. No catering company, no photographer on a drone, no guest list of 500. 40 people, string lights in the trees, and Evelyn in a dress she had found at a consignment shop that she altered herself because she said she didn't want to spend $3,000 on something she was only going to wear once. Virginia Webb was not at that wedding. She had refused to come. Virginia had made her feelings about Evelyn Marsh clear from the very first meeting. It was a Sunday dinner, 3 months into Marcus and Evelyn's relationship, and Virginia had set the table with her best china and her sharpest observations. She asked Evelyn where she had gone to school. When Evelyn said she had a high school diploma and had taken some community college classes before life got complicated, and Virginia had nodded slowly and said, "I see." She asked about Evelyn's family. When Evelyn explained that her father had passed when she was 12 and her mother had struggled with illness for most of Evelyn's adult life, Virginia said, "That must have been very hard," in a tone that suggested it was less a sympathetic observation and more a mark against her. By the end of that meal, Virginia had not said a single directly unkind word. She hadn't needed to. The message had been delivered through implication, through the careful architecture of questions designed to expose every gap between where Evelyn came from and where Virginia believed her son was going. On the drive home, Marcus told Evelyn to ignore his mother, that she came around eventually. Evelyn had looked out the passenger window and said quietly, "Some people don't come around, Marcus. Some people just get better at hiding what they think." She was right. But Marcus wasn't ready to hear it yet. The first year of their marriage was, by any honest account, extraordinary. They moved into the house on Harlow Street, not a mansion, not yet, but a solid 3-bedroom brick house in a neighborhood that was slowly being revitalized. Marcus had bought it years earlier as an investment property, but had never sold it. It felt right to start their life there. Evelyn planted a garden in the backyard. She painted the kitchen a shade of yellow that Marcus initially protested and then quietly came to love. She put a welcome mat by the front door that said, "Come back with a warrant," because she said a house needed to have a sense of humor. She cooked dinner most nights, not because Marcus expected it, but because she genuinely loved feeding people. She brought leftovers to the elderly couple next door. She adopted a stray cat named Gerald, who immediately claimed the most expensive armchair in the living room as his throne. The house breathed. It was alive in a way that Marcus's immaculate office and his glass-walled apartment had never been. He started coming home earlier. He started answering his phone less. Virginia noticed, and Virginia did not approve. The calls began about 4 months into the marriage. Marcus didn't know about them at first. Virginia called the house line in the mornings after Marcus left for work, and she would speak to Evelyn for 30, 40, sometimes 60 minutes at a stretch. On the surface, they were ordinary conversations. What was Evelyn cooking for dinner? Had she found a good dry cleaner in the neighborhood? Did she need any recipes? But Evelyn felt the architecture beneath every exchange. The way Virginia would mention, almost as an aside, that Marcus had been meant to marry a woman named Claudia Hensley, a corporate attorney from Charleston, before Evelyn had appeared and rearranged the plan. The way she would say things like, Marcus has always needed someone who understands his world, with just enough pause afterward to let the implications settle. The way she would describe Marcus's ambitions and then say, he just needs the right environment to reach his full potential, as if the current environment, the yellow kitchen, or the cat named Gerald, the wife who had once waitressed at Rosie's, was somehow holding him underwater. Evelyn said nothing to Marcus for months. She was trying to handle it herself. She was trying to be the bigger person, to give Virginia time, to believe that this would soften eventually. It didn't soften. It sharpened. 6 months into the marriage, Evelyn discovered she was pregnant. She sat in the bathroom of the house on Harlow Street on a Tuesday morning in March, holding a test with 2 lines, and she cried, not from sadness, but from the kind of overwhelming joy that has nowhere to go and just spills out of you whether you want it to or not. She had wanted this. She had wanted a family, a real one, the kind she had never quite had growing up. She planned to tell Marcus that evening over dinner. She was going to make his favorite meal, set the table properly, and let the moment be what it deserved to be. She never got the chance. Because that same afternoon, while Evelyn was at the grocery store selecting ingredients and rehearsing in her head what she was going to say, Virginia Webb let herself into the house on Harlow Street with a key she had never been given, but had apparently had made without asking. She was sitting at the kitchen table when Evelyn came through the door with shopping bags in both hands, and she was holding the pregnancy test that Evelyn had left on the bathroom counter, still wrapped in tissue, meaning to throw it away when she got home. What happened in that kitchen in the next 40 minutes would not be known to Marcus Webb for 8 years. He would come home that evening to find Evelyn unusually quiet, the dinner he had been promised not started, and his wife sitting on the back porch in the dark looking at the garden she had planted. He asked if she was all right. She said she was just tired. He believed her because he wanted to. Because sometimes loving someone means accepting the answer they give you even when something in you knows it isn't the whole truth. What Virginia had said in that kitchen was this, that the pregnancy was a mistake, that bringing a child into a marriage built on such unequal foundations was selfish, that Evelyn needed to understand that Marcus's trajectory, his real trajectory, the one Virginia had mapped out for him since before he could read, did not include this. She had not screamed. She had not threatened. She had spoken in the measured, reasonable tone of a woman who had convinced herself that cruelty, when delivered calmly enough, becomes wisdom. She told Evelyn that Marcus would eventually see what this marriage was costing him. She told Evelyn that a child would only deepen a problem that needed to be solved, not complicated. She placed an envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was a check for $75,000. She told Evelyn to think carefully about the kind of mother she wanted to be, and whether she truly believed that a child deserved to grow up in the shadow of a marriage that one half of the family had never accepted. Then she picked up her purse and left. Evelyn sat at that kitchen table for 2 hours without moving. Then she got up, put the envelope in the back of a drawer, and went to sit on the porch in the dark. She did not tell Marcus. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not the week after that. She kept waiting for the right moment, and the right moment kept not coming, and Virginia kept calling, and the calls kept shifting from implication to something that felt closer to instruction. And then, 8 weeks after Evelyn found out she was pregnant, everything changed in a way that made all of it irrelevant. The accident happened on a Thursday evening in October. Marcus was in a meeting 200 miles away when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Just he answered it. A voice told him there had been a car accident, a serious one. His wife had been in the vehicle. He needed to come home. What Marcus found when he arrived back in Clarksville was not what he had been prepared for. The police told him the accident had occurred on the overpass on Route 9, that the car had gone through the guardrail, that there had been a fire. They told him the vehicle was registered in Evelyn's name. They told him they were deeply sorry. They told him the case was closed. There was a funeral, a closed casket because the fire, they explained, had made an open viewing impossible. Virginia arranged everything. She chose the flowers and the readings and the music. She greeted every guest at the door of the funeral home with the composed dignity of a woman who had buried grief in her bones for so long that she had learned to wear it like a garment. She held Marcus when he could not stand on his own. She was, by every outward measure, a mother doing what mothers do, holding her child together in the worst moment of his life. Marcus Webb stood at that graveside in the October cold and watched them lower a casket into the ground. And something inside him that had been warm and alive and capable of joy went very, very quiet. He went back to work 10 days later. Virginia called every morning. She brought food on Sundays. She introduced him, gently at first and then with increasing persistence, to women she deemed appropriate. Attorneys, executives, women with graduate degrees and family names that meant something in the city. Marcus declined every introduction. He was not ready. He was not sure he would ever be ready. He threw himself into his work instead. And in the years that followed, the work consumed him the way work consumes men who have nothing else left to protect. He became, by every metric the world uses to measure such things, extraordinarily successful. And he was, by every metric that actually matters, completely and utterly alone. 8 years passed. The world changed around Marcus Webb the way it always does. Loudly, carelessly, without regard for the people it leaves behind. His company expanded across the Southeast. His name appeared on buildings, on donation walls, on the short lists of people who were credited with reshaping the skylines of mid-sized American cities. He moved out of Clarksville and back into it 3 separate times, each time into something larger and more expensive, as if space itself could be a cure for emptiness. He dated occasionally, briefly, never seriously. The women he met were accomplished and kind and entirely wrong for him in ways he couldn't always articulate, but could always feel within the first few weeks. He ended things politely, always with the sense that he was doing the other person a favor rather than his own cowardice a service. Virginia continued to orbit his life with the steady, one implacable pull of a planet. She had opinions about his investments, his associates, his wardrobe, his apartments. She delivered these opinions with the confidence of someone who has never once been told that her opinions were not requested. Marcus accepted them the way he had accepted everything from Virginia, as the cost of being her son. He had never stopped to ask whether the cost was fair. He had never stopped to ask a great many things. And then the development deal came through. A commercial real estate group out of Atlanta had been acquiring properties in the old east side of Clarksville for 18 months. The neighborhood where Marcus had grown up, where the buildings were low and the paint peeled and the basketball courts had bent rims and no nets. They were buying everything on 3 specific blocks and demolishing the structures to build a mixed-use retail and residential development. Now, the offer they made Marcus for the house on Harlow Street, the house he had locked and left 8 years ago and had not returned to since, was $240,000. It was objectively a reasonable offer for a property that had sat empty and deteriorating for nearly a decade. Marcus's assistant had flagged it, his attorneys had reviewed it, and everyone involved had assumed he would simply sign. Marcus had stared at the paperwork for 11 days before finally agreeing to drive out and look at the property himself. He told himself it was due diligence. He told himself it was practical. He told himself a great many things on the 40-minute drive across the city, watching the skyline shrink and the streets narrow and the neighborhood rise up around the car, like a memory he hadn't asked to revisit. His driver offered to wait. Marcus told him to go. He needed to do this part alone. He stood on the sidewalk in front of the house on Harlow Street for a full 3 minutes before he moved. The place looked worse than he remembered. The white paint gone gray, the porch railing split and listing to one side, weeds filling every crack in the front path. One of the upstairs windows boarded over with a piece of plywood someone had written nothing on. The garden Evelyn had planted in the side yard was gone, reclaimed by the kind of tough, indifferent grass that grows where nothing is wanted. The welcome mat was gone. The cat named Gerald had presumably moved on to another armchair in another life. Marcus walked up the front path, and the porch steps groaned under him with the exaggerated complaint of wood that had not been asked to bear weight in a very long time. He reached for the lockbox his attorney's office had arranged to be installed on the door. He typed in the code. The box opened. He took out the key. And then he saw it. Through the front window, grimy, filmed with 8 years of neglect. A light. Faint. Warm. The amber glow of a lamp. Marcus stood very still. He told himself it was a safety light on a timer, left by the property management company. He told himself it was a street light reflecting oddly off the dirty glass. He told himself anything that wasn't the thing his body already seemed to know. Because his heart was doing something it had not done in 8 years. It was slamming against the inside of his chest like it was trying to get out. He put the key in the lock. He turned it. He pushed the door open. And from somewhere inside the house, he heard footsteps. They were soft footsteps, light and careful, the kind of footsteps that belong to someone who has learned to move through a space quietly, as if the quieter they move, the less likely they are to be noticed. So Marcus stood in the open doorway and did not breathe. The footsteps slowed, stopped. There was a pause so long and so dense that the sound of the street behind him, a dog barking 2 blocks over, a car passing, felt intrusive and wrong. And then the footsteps started again, closer this time, coming toward the door from the other side. The door opened, just a crack, just enough for one eye, one side of a face, a sliver of an expression that Marcus could not yet read. A woman's voice, slow and careful. "Can I help you?" Marcus opened his mouth to answer. The door opened wider, and Marcus Webb, billionaire, grieving husband, man who had built an empire on the rubble of his own loss, stopped breathing entirely, because he knew that face. He had memorized that face the way you memorize the things you are most afraid of losing, without meaning to, without effort, just by being near them long enough that they become part of you. He knew the particular angle of those cheekbones. He knew the way her left eyebrow sat just slightly higher than the right when she was uncertain about something. He knew the small crescent scar near her temple from a bicycle accident she had told him about on their third conversation at the counter of Rosie's diner. He knew every single thing about this face, because this face had been buried in the ground on a cold Thursday in October 8 years ago, and it was standing right in front of him. "Evelyn," Marcus said, and the word came out of him the way words come out when there is no longer any space between thought and voice. Raw and involuntary and barely human. The woman's eyes went wide. She grabbed the doorframe with both hands, her face drained of color in a single instant, as though something had been pulled out from beneath it. "Marcus," she breathed. Neither of them moved. Neither of them could. And then, from somewhere deeper inside the house, a small voice. "Mommy? Who's there?" A girl appeared at the end of the hallway. She was 7, maybe 8, with dark hair pulled into 2 uneven pigtails and bare feet on the old wooden floor and a stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. She had hazel eyes, the particular warm flecked hazel that Marcus saw every morning in his own mirror. She had his nose and the precise shape of his jaw and a way of tilting her head to one side when she was curious that Marcus had seen in photographs of himself as a child. As she stood at the end of that hallway and looked at this stranger in the doorway with the frank, uncomplicated assessment that only children are capable of, and she said, "Mommy, is that man okay? He looks like he's going to fall down." Marcus reached for the door frame because she was right. He felt the floor shifting beneath him, not literally, but in the way the floor shifts when everything you have understood about your own life turns out to have been assembled on a foundation of someone else's lies. He looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at him. Between them was 8 years of grief and silence, and a truth so enormous that neither of them had the language for it yet. "What is her name?" Marcus said. It was not quite a question. He already knew what she would say. He knew because of those eyes, that jaw, and that particular way of tilting her head. He knew the way you know things that were true before you had words for them. Evelyn's voice when it came was barely above a whisper. "Her name is Claire." Marcus closed his eyes. He opened them again. The girl was still there. The house was still real. Evelyn was still alive. He had a daughter he had never met and she was standing 15 feet away from him with a stuffed rabbit in bare feet, and she was looking at him with hazel eyes that were also unmistakably his. "How?" Marcus said. He couldn't finish the sentence. He tried again. "How is this?" "Not here," Evelyn said quietly. Her voice had changed. The shock was still there, but something had closed over it. Something practiced, protective, the armor of a woman who has learned to manage emergencies. Not in front of her. She turned to the girl and said, in a voice so carefully normal that it had to cost her something, "Baby, go back to your room for a few minutes, okay? Mommy needs to talk to this man about something grown up." The girl, Claire, looked at Marcus one more time with those hazel eyes. Then she turned and padded back down the hallway, the stuffed rabbit trailing from one hand. They listened to her footsteps on the stairs. A door closed softly somewhere above them. And then there was nothing but two people standing on opposite sides of a threshold that one of them had believed, for 8 years, would never be crossed again. Evelyn stepped back into the house. She didn't invite Marcus in. She just stepped back, and he followed. Because what else do you do when the dead come back to life and step into the house where they have apparently been living for God knows how long? The living room looked nothing like he remembered it. The furniture was different, simple, worn, bought secondhand by the look of it. There were drawings taped to the walls, dozens of them, in crayon and marker and colored pencil. Horses, mostly in houses, and flowers, and one large portrait executed with the confident inaccuracy of a child who has not yet learned that art requires precision. Two figures, one tall and one small, holding hands in front of a house. Underneath, in careful block letters, "Me and Mommy." Marcus stood in the middle of this room and looked at 8 years of a life he had not known existed, and he said the only thing he was capable of saying. "She doesn't know about me." It was not a question either. Evelyn was standing by the window with her arms crossed over her chest, not looking at him. "No," she said, "she doesn't know about you." A silence settled over the room that was heavier than any silence Marcus had ever sat in. He waited. He had learned in 8 years of business negotiations that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop talking and let the other person fill the space. But Evelyn didn't fill the space. She stood by the window with her arms crossed and her jaw set and her eyes fixed on something outside. And she said nothing for so long that Marcus finally had to speak again. "Evelyn, I need you to tell me what happened." She turned then, slowly, and looked at him with an expression that contained so many things at once. Grief, exhaustion, anger, and something underneath all of it that looked almost like relief, with the complicated relief of someone who has been carrying a secret so long that the weight of it has become indistinguishable from the weight of their own body. "You should sit down," she said. "This is going to take a while." Marcus sat, and Evelyn Webb, who was also legally and in every other way that mattered, Evelyn Marsh, the name she had returned to when she disappeared, began to tell him the truth about the night she died. Why she had been 7 weeks pregnant when Virginia came to the house on Harlow Street for what Evelyn would later understand was the last time Virginia intended to ask nicely. Marcus had been in Memphis for a 3-day conference, and Evelyn had been home alone, feeling the particular first trimester exhaustion that turns the middle of the afternoon into something you simply have to sleep through. Virginia arrived without calling, which was not unusual. She came in through the back door, at which she had a habit of doing that Evelyn had never managed to address without it becoming a confrontation she wasn't ready for. She sat at the kitchen table, and she placed very deliberately a manila folder in the center of that table. Inside the folder were documents. Legal documents. Evelyn picked them up and read them slowly, because her brain was not processing quickly that afternoon, and because what she was reading did not immediately make sense. But they were documents for the dissolution of a marriage. They were specifically divorce papers, already prepared, already specifying terms. Terms that included a financial settlement for Evelyn of $150,000 in exchange for her agreement to terminate the marriage quietly, without contest and without any claim to Marcus's assets or future earnings. Virginia had had them drawn up by an attorney. She had done this before speaking to her son about it. She had done this the way someone does a thing when they are not asking permission and are not entertaining the possibility of being told no. Evelyn set the papers down. She looked at Virginia, and Virginia looked back at her with the expression of a woman who has made a decision and is simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. "You can't do this," Evelyn said. Virginia said, "I already have." What followed was not a screaming match. Evelyn was not a screaming match kind of woman. She was the kind of woman who went very quiet when she was most upset, and she went very quiet now. And she told Virginia in a voice that was almost perfectly steady that she was not going to sign those papers, that she was not going to leave her husband, and that Virginia was going to have to go back to her attorney and explain that her plan had not worked. Virginia listened to all of this. Then she said, "You're pregnant, aren't you?" It was not a question. Evelyn went cold. "And I can see it," Virginia said. "I could see it before you could probably. The way you're moving, the way you're sitting." She folded her hands on the table with the practiced calm of a woman who has never in her life allowed an emotion to show on her face before she was ready for it to be seen. "This changes nothing," Virginia said. "In fact, it makes the situation more urgent." Evelyn told her to leave. Virginia did not leave immediately. She gathered the folder of unsigned papers, and she stood up and she said, in a tone that Evelyn would hear in her sleep for years afterward, "You have 1 week to make the right decision. After that, the decision gets made for you." Then she walked out through the back door and drove away and left Evelyn sitting at that kitchen table with the cold certainty that she was in the presence of something she had badly underestimated. The week that followed was the worst of Evelyn's life up to that point, and she had already had some bad ones. She did not tell Marcus. She has asked herself 1,000 times in the years since why she made that choice, and the answer is always the same. She was afraid. Not of Virginia, or not only of Virginia. She was afraid of what telling Marcus would require. She was afraid of placing him in the impossible position of choosing between his wife and his mother, afraid that the choosing itself would damage something between them that couldn't be repaired, afraid that whatever Marcus chose, the act of making him choose would change what they had. She had grown up watching what happened to families when loyalties were forced into the open too fast. She had seen the damage. She wasn't ready to risk it, so she said nothing and hoped that Virginia would back down. And Virginia, as Evelyn should have known by then, did not back down from anything. Here on the 7th day, Marcus came home from a business trip to find Evelyn sitting on the back porch in the dark. This had become, he would realize later, her way of processing the things she could not say out loud. He sat with her for a while without talking. He asked if everything was all right. She said she was fine, just tired. He made her tea and sat with her until she said she wanted to go to bed, and then he held her in the dark, and she lay there listening to him breathe. And she thought, well, she would tell him tomorrow. She would find the words tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. Because at 6 a.m. the following day, while Marcus was in the shower and Evelyn was still lying in the gray early light, thinking about how to start the conversation that would change everything, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She answered it. A man's voice, professional and flat, said that she was being given a final courtesy notice, wondering that if she had not made arrangements by the end of that day, the situation would be resolved through other means. He did not identify himself. He did not need to. Evelyn lay in that bed for 10 minutes after the call ended. Then she got up, got dressed, and began to think about what she was going to do. She had no plan. She wants to be clear about that. Looking back, there was no strategy, no scheme, no carefully prepared exit. What she had was a suitcase, $600 in a personal account that Virginia didn't know about, and the terrifying understanding that she and the child she was carrying were no longer safe in this house. She left a note for Marcus. She has gone back and forth over the years about whether this was cowardice or mercy, and she has never fully decided. The note said that she loved him. It said that she was sorry. It said that something had happened that she didn't know how to explain yet, and that she needed time to figure out what to do. It said she would be in touch when she could. It said she loved him again at the bottom, because once didn't feel like enough. She left it on the kitchen table. She picked up her suitcase. She walked out of the house on Harlow Street at 7:40 in the morning on a Tuesday in October, and she did not look back, because she knew that if she looked back, she would not be able to keep walking. She took a bus to the next city. She checked into a motel that cost $40 a night and smelled of industrial cleaner and other people's history. She called Marcus's number from the motel phone and hung up before it could connect, 3 times over 3 days because she didn't know what to say and was terrified that whatever she said would make things worse rather than better. On the 4th day, she turned on the television in the motel room and she saw something that stopped her heart completely. A local news report saw a woman's body recovered from a vehicle that had gone off the Route 9 overpass into the river below. The vehicle registered to an Evelyn Webb. The report said the victim had not yet been formally identified, but that the case was being investigated as a fatal single-vehicle accident. Evelyn sat on the edge of that motel bed in her coat because the heater was broken and she hadn't had the energy to complain about it. And she watched the television tell the world that she was dead. And she understood, with a clarity that felt almost like calm, exactly what had been done and exactly who had done it. Virginia had staged it. The conclusion came to Evelyn not as a shock, but as the final piece of a pattern she had been watching assemble itself for months, the last tile snapping into a mosaic she had been too close to see clearly before now. The call that morning, the professional voice giving her a final courtesy notice, had not been a warning. It had been a cover. Someone had been sent to follow her. The car, the accident, the body, all of it arranged while Evelyn was sitting in a $40 motel room trying to figure out her next move. Virginia had not waited for Evelyn to make the right decision. Virginia had simply decided that the most efficient solution to the problem of Evelyn Marsh was to make her disappear in a way that closed every door behind her. If Evelyn was dead, there were no divorce proceedings, no shared assets, so no custody complications once the pregnancy became known. There was only grief, a clean narrative, and a son who would eventually, with the proper guidance, redirect his life along the lines his mother had always intended for it. Evelyn sat in that motel room, and she thought about going to the police. She thought about calling Marcus directly. She ran through every option available to a 26-year-old woman with $600, no identification she trusted to use, and a baby growing inside her. A baby whose grandmother had just demonstrated, clearly and without ambiguity, that she was willing to do whatever was necessary to protect her vision of her son's future. And Evelyn made a decision that she has never been fully at peace with, and that she has never been able to honestly say was wrong. She decided to stay dead. She did it for the child. That is the truth, and it is also the whole truth. And she has had 8 years to interrogate it, and has not found a more honest answer underneath. She did not believe that Marcus would be able to protect her and the baby from Virginia as long as Virginia had the advantage of appearing to the outside world like a grieving mother managing a family tragedy. She did not have money, connections, or documentation. Virginia had all three, plus the unassailable moral high ground of a woman whose son's wife had apparently just died in a tragic accident. If Evelyn resurfaced, the story became complicated. Complicated stories require lawyers and courts and months or years of proceedings, during which a vulnerable pregnant woman living under an assumed identity would be at a serious disadvantage against a wealthy and well-connected opponent who had already demonstrated her willingness to play without rules. And somewhere in the cold arithmetic of those calculations, fear settled in like a tenant that never really left. She was afraid. She was 26 years old and alone and pregnant and afraid, and the fear made the decision before logic fully could. She used the last of her cash to get on a bus headed 4 states away. She found a room in a boarding house in a small city where nobody knew her name. She took on work under a name that was close enough to hers to feel natural. Ellie Marsh, and not Evelyn, waitressing, cleaning, whatever was available. She had Claire in a hospital where the paperwork listed the father as unknown because there was no version of that conversation that felt safe yet. She kept moving, slowly, cautiously, never staying in one place long enough to settle, but always staying within driving distance of Clarksville because she couldn't make herself go too far. Clarksville was where Marcus was, and however impossible returning felt, she was not willing to put herself on the other side of an ocean from the man she still, in every quiet moment, loved completely. The house on Harlow Street had been empty for 7 years when Evelyn came back to it. She had driven past it twice before she stopped. The property management company Marcus had retained had stopped maintaining it years earlier. She would find out later that Marcus had let the contract lapse sometime in the 3rd year after her disappearance, at around the time he stopped visiting the neighborhood entirely. The locks on the back door were rusted through. The electricity was off. The water was off. But the structure was sound. Marcus had bought well always. And Evelyn had developed, in the years of near poverty she'd navigated alone, a practical relationship with inconvenience. She got the utilities reconnected under a business name she registered for $30 at the county clerk's office. She bought a space heater. She found furniture at estate sales and left it on the curb for 3 days to make sure nothing was following her home. She enrolled Claire in the elementary school 6 blocks away under the name Claire Marsh, and she told the enrollment office that they had recently relocated from out of state, which was true enough to require no further elaboration. She took 2 jobs, one at a grocery store 2 miles away, one cleaning the offices of a small accounting firm 3 nights a week. She paid for everything in cash. She told Claire that their family was small but strong. She told her that her father had been a good man who wasn't able to be with them, and that this was no one's fault, and that being without him didn't make their family any less real or any less whole. Claire accepted this the way children accept the foundational facts of their lives, completely, without demanding the architecture beneath them. She was a serious, curious, or an affectionate child who loved horses and drawing and a stuffed rabbit named Roger, and asking questions about things that Evelyn didn't always have good answers to. She was, by any measure, magnificent, and she looked more clearly with every passing year, exactly like her father. Marcus sat in the living room of the house on Harlow Street and listened to all of this. He did not interrupt. He had learned long ago that the most important thing a person can do when they are receiving difficult information is to remain still enough for the other person to keep going. But he was not still inside. Inside, something was dismantling itself with a kind of controlled violence. The entire architecture of the last 8 years, the grief he had built his life around, the story he had told himself about who he was and what had happened to him. All of it was coming apart, wall by wall. And in its place was something that he did not yet have words for, but that felt, more than anything, like rage. Not at Evelyn. He understood Evelyn. He understood fear and impossible choices and the math that gets done in dark motel rooms when you are alone and young, and the world has just demonstrated that it does not intend to be fair to you. His rage was not for Evelyn. His rage was for Virginia, his mother. Was the woman who had sat beside him at the graveside in October and held his hand while he wept for a wife she knew to be alive, carrying a grandchild she had decided she did not want to exist. The woman who had organized a funeral for a woman she had arranged to disappear. The woman who had spent the subsequent 8 years watching her son hollow himself out with grief and loss and had said nothing, had done nothing. He had sat across from him at Sunday dinners and asked about his investments and suggested women he might consider dating, and had lived every day of those 8 years knowing what she had taken from him. When Evelyn finished speaking, the room was very quiet. The house made the small, settled sounds that old houses make. A creak somewhere above them, the faint ticking of the baseboard heaters, a car passing slowly outside. "Where is she right now?" Marcus asked. "Aren't at your mother's house?" "I don't know," Evelyn said. "I don't know where she is. I've been very careful to make sure she doesn't know I'm here." Marcus stood up. He was not a man who made decisions loudly. He made them the way he made all his important decisions. Quickly, quietly, with the absolute certainty of someone who has stopped negotiating with himself. "I need to talk to her," he said. "Marcus, not to threaten her," he said. Though even as he said it, he understood that his definition of threatening was probably different from Evelyn's right now. "I need to look her in the face and hear her say it. I need to hear her tell me why." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. She had the expression of someone who has practiced a great many outcomes in her head and is now watching the actual one begin to unfold and finding it both better and more complicated than any version she rehearsed. "Be careful," she said finally. "She is not going to respond the way you expect her to. She never does." Marcus picked up his jacket from the arm of the couch where he'd dropped it when he sat down. He turned toward the door. And then he stopped, because there was something he needed to do before he left this house. He turned back. "Claire," he said, "is she upstairs?" "She's in her room," Evelyn said. "Marcus, I don't think you should, I'm not going to say anything to her," he said. "I just need to see her again." "Difficult day," she said. "Sit down. I'll get you something." "I was at the house on Harlow Street today," Marcus said. Virginia's hand, which had been reaching toward her wine glass, stopped. Just briefly. Just long enough. "And," she said. "Evelyn is alive," Marcus said. The sitting room was extremely quiet. A clock on the mantel counted out 3 full seconds. Virginia picked up her wine glass and took a careful sip and set it back down and said, "What did you say?" "You heard me," Marcus said. "Evelyn is alive. She's been living in our house on Harlow Street for years, and she has a daughter, my daughter, an 8-year-old girl who has never had a father because you arranged for that father to believe for 8 years that his wife was dead." Virginia set the glass down with the measured precision of a woman controlling her hands because her face is no longer entirely controllable. "Marcus," she said, "Aunt, I think you need to sit down and tell me exactly what "No," Marcus said. He said it quietly, but the quietness of it was not gentleness. It was the quietness of something under enormous compression. "No, I don't need to sit down. I need you to tell me the truth. Right now. Not the version you've prepared. Not the version that makes you the person who did what was necessary for the right reasons. The actual truth. Did you know she was alive?" Virginia looked at him for a long time, and the clock on the mantel continued to count. Outside, a car passed on the wide, quiet street. Marcus watched his mother's face and waited, and what he saw moving beneath its surface was something he had never seen there before in 35 years. He saw the calculation falter, not stop. Virginia's calculations never stopped, but falter briefly like a machine hitting a load it hadn't anticipated. "I did what I did," Virginia said, "because I believed it was the only way to protect you from a decision you were not equipped to think clearly about." Marcus stared at her. "That's not an answer to my question." "It is the only answer that matters," Virginia said. She stood up because sitting felt, perhaps, like a disadvantage. She was a small woman, but she had never in her life allowed that to be a disadvantage either. "You were 27 years old, Marcus. You were in the early stages of building something that was going to be extraordinary. You had married a woman who was kind and charming and entirely fundamentally wrong for the life you were building. She didn't understand your world. She didn't come from it. She didn't have the tools to navigate it. A child would have anchored you to a situation that was already unsustainable, and you were too in love to see it. So you had her declared dead," Marcus said. It was not a question. And it wasn't an accusation either, quite. It was more the way you say a thing when you need to hear it said out loud, when the words in your own head haven't made it fully real yet. Virginia did not answer immediately. Marcus stepped closer. "Mother, did you stage a car accident and have Evelyn declared dead in order to get her out of my life?" Virginia lifted her chin. "I made arrangements to ensure that the situation resolved itself cleanly," she said. "I did not physically harm anyone. She was not in the vehicle. She was alive and uninjured, and she was given the means to start a new life, and she chose to stay alive," Marcus said, his voice rising for the first time. "She chose to protect her child from the woman who had just demonstrated that she was willing to commit fraud, and God knows what else to rearrange her son's marriage. She wasn't running from me. She was running from you." "She was running," Virginia said, with the absolute infuriating composure that had been her armor for his entire life, "because she knew, on some level, that I was right." The sound that came out of Marcus Webb at that moment was not quite a word. It was the sound a person makes when something they have believed about another person, something fundamental, something that felt as solid and permanent as geography, turns out to have been a construction all along. He stood in his mother's sitting room, in the house he had bought for her, looking at a woman he had loved completely and trusted without question for 35 years, and he saw her clearly for the first time. Not the carefully managed version she had always presented to him, the actual woman, the woman who had looked at his grief over a dead wife and maintained the deception. The woman who had watched him try and fail to build a life that felt meaningful in the absence of the one thing that had actually made it feel that way, Evelyn had said nothing, done nothing, adjusted nothing. The woman who had decided alone without any authority other than her own absolute certainty that she knew best to remove a person from her son's life as efficiently as one removes an obstacle from a path. "Did you know about Claire?" Marcus said. "Did you know Evelyn was pregnant?" Virginia's jaw tightened. "I suspected it. And you still proceeded." "The situation required a resolution," Virginia said. "And I provided one." Marcus looked at his mother for a very long time. He thought about everything he wanted to say. There was a great deal of it, 8 years' worth, and most of it was the kind of thing that, once said, could not be unsaid, and he had enough experience with irreversibility to respect it. He said only this: "I have a daughter who doesn't know my name. And I have a woman who spent 8 years alone and afraid because the person who was supposed to love me chose to play God with both our lives. And you're standing in front of me explaining your reasoning." Virginia started to speak. "I'm not finished," Marcus said. "I'm going to fix this. I'm going to go back to that house, and I'm going to be a father to my daughter, and I'm going to make sure that Evelyn has everything she needs, and that neither of them ever has to be afraid again. And you are going to stay away from them. Completely. Permanently. You are not going to make contact with Evelyn. You are not going to seek out Claire. You are not going to involve yourself in this in any way, through any means, directly or indirectly." Virginia stared at him. "And if I don't," Marcus said, "then I will hand every piece of evidence I have gathered today, and I will gather a great deal more, to the appropriate authorities and let them determine what charges are applicable to a woman who conspired to fraudulently declare another person dead in order to dissolve that person's marriage. I am not bluffing. I have never bluffed in a negotiation in my life, and I am not going to start with you." A silence descended on the sitting room that felt like weather, like the particular stillness that precedes something consequential. Virginia Webb looked at her son. Her son looked back at her, and something passed between them that was not love and was not hatred, but was the complex, devastated recognition of two people who have just understood, simultaneously, that a relationship they both believed was one thing was actually another. "What, you would really do that?" Virginia said. It was the first time Marcus had ever heard uncertainty in his mother's voice, not the performed uncertainty of someone who is strategically reconsidering their position. Real uncertainty, the kind that comes from encountering a version of your child you didn't know existed. "Yes," Marcus said simply. He picked up his jacket. He walked to the door of the sitting room. He stopped because there was one more thing. "Her name is Claire," he said, without turning around. "She has hazel eyes and she likes horses and drawing, and she has a stuffed rabbit named Roger. She is 8 years old and she has never had a father. I intend to spend a very long time correcting that." He walked out of the house. He got in his car. He drove back across Clarksville through the glass and steel corridors of the city he had built his reputation in, back toward the east side, back toward the old neighborhood, back toward the house on Harlow Street. He parked in front of it. He sat in the car for a moment and looked at the light in the window. That same warm amber glow he had seen through the dirty glass earlier, when everything had still been the wrong shape and the world had still made its familiar, terrible sense. Then he got out of the car and walked up the path, and the porch steps groaned under him again, and he knocked. After a moment, Evelyn opened the door. She looked at his face and said nothing for several seconds, reading it the way she had always been able to read it, with the ease of someone who learned that face before it was finished becoming itself. "How did it go?" she asked. "She admitted it," Marcus said, "not all at once and not without dressing it in justification, but she admitted it." Evelyn looked at him. "What happens now?" Marcus said. "Now I need to meet my daughter properly, if you'll let me." Evelyn held his gaze for a long time. Behind her, from somewhere upstairs, or he could hear Claire moving around. A small thumping sound that might have been someone rolling out of bed or jumping off it, or doing whatever 8-year-olds do when they've been quietly alone in their rooms long enough to require the discovery of new entertainment. "She's going to have questions," Evelyn said. "I know," Marcus said. "So will I for the rest of my life. But I'd rather answer them than keep pretending they don't exist." Evelyn stepped aside. Marcus stepped in out of the evening air. The door closed behind him. From the top of the stairs, a voice called down, small and clear, and slightly impatient in the way of children who have been told to wait and have decided that sufficient time has elapsed. "Mommy, can I come down now? I've been up here a really long time." Evelyn looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Evelyn. "Yes, baby," Evelyn called back, her voice steady, her eyes not entirely dry. "Okay, you can come down now." And Claire came down the stairs, slowly at first, one hand on the railing, the stuffed rabbit Roger under the other arm. And she stopped halfway down and looked at the man standing in her living room, this stranger with her eyes, and she tilted her head to one side, the way she always did when she was deciding what to make of something. "Are you the man from before?" she said. "Who was at the door?" "Yes," Marcus said. "So what I am." "Why did you come back?" Marcus thought about this question for a moment. He thought about all the ways it could be answered, the true ones and the simple ones, and the ones that were both at once. "Because I live here," he said finally. "I mean, I used to live here, and I found out tonight that something very important to me is still here, and I couldn't leave without coming back to see it." Claire considered this with the grave, meticulous attention of a child who takes information seriously. "What's the important thing?" she asked. Marcus looked at his daughter. He looked at the stuffed rabbit. He looked at Evelyn, standing a few feet away, watching him with an expression that contained an entire history and also, tentatively, something that looked like the beginning of a future. "You," Marcus said. "It's you." Claire stared at him for a moment. Then she looked at her mother. Evelyn nodded once, barely. He almost imperceptibly, but enough. Claire looked back at Marcus. She came down the last 4 steps. She walked across the living room with the unhurried certainty of someone who has decided something and is simply executing the decision. She stopped in front of Marcus and held out Roger, the stuffed rabbit, with both hands. "You can hold him for a minute if you want," she said. "He helps when things feel weird." Marcus took the rabbit. He held it carefully. The way you hold something that belongs to someone else and that you understand without being told is of real and serious value. He crouched down so he was at Claire's level, the way his father had always crouched down to talk to him when he was small, and he looked at his daughter, at this impossible, actual, magnificent person who had been growing up in the world while he was across the city building things that ultimately meant nothing. And he said very quietly, "Thank you." Claire looked at him for a moment with those hazel eyes, then she said, "You have the same eyes as me." "I know," Marcus said. "Is that why you came back?" she asked. Marcus thought about telling her the whole truth. He thought about all of it, the grief and the lies and the 8 years of absence, and the mother who had made herself into a wall between him and this moment. He thought about how much of it she would understand now, and how much of it would need to wait for later, or for the years when she had more words and more context and more of the complicated adult understanding required to hold a story this large without it breaking something. "Part of it," he said. "I'll tell you the rest when you're ready to hear it." Claire seemed to accept this as a reasonable answer. She reached out and took Roger back from Marcus with the efficiency of someone reclaiming a thing that has done its job. She turned to Evelyn. "Mommy," she said. "I'm hungry." Evelyn laughed. A real one, sudden and unguarded, the kind that starts in the chest before the face knows what's happening. It was the first time Marcus had heard her laugh in 8 years. It sounded exactly the same. It sounded like Rosie's diner at 6 in the morning, like string lights in the trees at a backyard wedding, like the yellow kitchen that he had initially protested and then quietly come to love. It sounded like a life, not a finished one, not a simple one, but a real one, with all the damage and all the beauty that real lives carry, and all the long, necessary work of rebuilding something that someone else took apart. Marcus stood up. He looked around at the living room, the second-hand furniture, the horse drawings taped to the walls, the portrait of 2 figures in front of a house with me and Mommy written underneath in careful block letters. He thought about what that picture would look like with a 3rd figure added. He thought it would look right. He thought it would look, finally, like the truth. "I'll make dinner," he said. Evelyn looked at him. "You don't know where anything is," she said. "I'll figure it out," Marcus said. "I'm good at figuring things out." Evelyn looked at him for a moment with the particular expression of someone who is deciding whether to believe in something they have wanted for a very long time and have learned to be careful about. And then she stepped aside and gestured toward the kitchen. "The pasta is in the cabinet above the stove," and she said, "Claire likes butter and Parmesan, not sauce." "Noted," Marcus said. He walked into the kitchen. The light came on. Warm, ordinary, the unremarkable light of a kitchen on an evening when dinner is being made and a child is waiting to be fed. Marcus Webb stood in it and breathed. Outside, the city went about its business, indifferent and continuous. The house on Harlow Street held the three of them gently, the way old houses hold the people inside them when the right people have finally come home. And somewhere across the city, in a large and immaculately maintained house on a wide and quiet street, Virginia Webb sat in her wing-back chair with a glass of wine she was no longer drinking and thought about what she had built and what she had destroyed and what the difference between those two things actually was. She had not yet found the answer. Perhaps she never would. But in the house on Harlow Street, a man was making pasta. A girl was drawing horses at the kitchen table. A woman was setting out 3 plates instead of 2 for the first time in 8 years. And whatever came next, the lawyers and the documentation and the slow, painstaking work of rebuilding trust across a distance of 8 years and immeasurable loss. Tonight, this was enough. Tonight, the door was open. Tonight, for the right people were home. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the people in your life who are holding truths they haven't found the words for yet, leave us a comment. Tell us what you would have done in Marcus's place. Tell us what you would have done in Evelyn's. Tell us where you're watching from, because this community is one of the most thoughtful we've ever known, and we read every single word you write. Like this video if it stayed with you. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. We'll see you in the next one.